Awesome. All right. So where we're going to pick it up this week is where we left off last week, which is always a great place to start. And so we're kicking it off on page 130. We're in the chapter, The Family Afterward, page 130. And what we're talking about the last couple weeks is the directions that recovered alcoholics, recovered addicts, recovered members of whatever brings you to this study today tend to go in two directions. One of two directions. One, diving headlong into business, or two, diving headlong into spirituality. And the book says, hey, might be better to do the latter than the former. We think it's dangerous to dive into business. But either way, based on that experience, there's going to be some challenges and some difficulties that the family is going to have navigating this new way of life. And one of the main difficulties or the main struggles is that wanting attention. That family member that is now recovered is either so fixated on work or so fixated on spirituality and helping others. And there's that, hey, what about me? And last week we saw, hey, what we've got to do as the members who are recovered, the members who are taking these steps, we've got to make sure we show up to our family as well. And so that's sort of the context of, what we're talking about. Ooh, and Rob's got, what happened is I saw Rob put something very exciting in the chat and my brain was like, I should read that, but I know it's 8 things and I'm not going to read that quickly or efficiently. And so I was like, I should read that. I'm not going to read that, but you guys should read that. Rob's got all these great stuff in the chat. So one more suggestion, whether the family has spiritual convictions or not, they may do well to examine the principles by which the alcoholic member is trying to live. And what we're seeing is a continuation of a theme that we picked up, that we saw it as early as into action, and we saw it quite clearly in working with others. And it was loud as day in 2 wives. And that theme is the idea of, if there is somebody that I want to help, the best thing I could do is work these 12 steps. And so that's what it's saying here. The recommendation for the family is to, regardless of your background, what we would suggest is that you work these 12 steps. And in the early days, it wasn't just the alcoholic member, it was the alcoholic and their family who would take this course of action. And I say often, I've just been doing it lately, but I say it a lot, so it feels like it's often. But I talk about the idea that I take when we talk about the spiritual principles or examine the principles. Now, there's nothing wrong with taking the principles as these concepts or ideas like hope or faith or courage or brotherly love or justice or that sort of thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But what I found really effective in my life was to take the view that the principles were not these nebulous ideas, but instead the tangible actions of the 12 steps. And so when I did that made it a little more easy to see how I could tangibly practice these principles on all my affairs. And examining those principles, I mean, that's what it would be asking me to do. Examine the actions of the 12 steps. And if you're like, Paige, that's wrong, and I hate you, I would say that I hate you is a little extreme. Do you want to do some inventory on it? But that's fine. You're right. I'm wrong. And I always like to say, come join me. It's a little fun over here being wrong. But you guys can be right. I'll be wrong. All right. So it says, they can hardly fail to approve of these simple principles, though the head of the house still fails somewhat in practicing them. And what I want to point out is what we see is this non-dual consciousness, this non-dual approach, where two things are true. The first thing that is true is that here in 12-step, we have powerful, spectacular recoveries where we are absolutely radically transformed. Who I am today is without question not who I was when I got here. And I'm human and super flawed. My sponsor will tell you, frequently wrong. I just said I was wrong, so I'm frequently wrong. And that's what I love. And we were speaking about, I believe, last week, where it's that idea that 12-step is not expecting perfection. 12-step is giving me the grace to be imperfect and to make mistakes and to be able to stay sober and grow through that. So even though I fail somewhat at practicing them. And it says, nothing will help the man who is off on a spiritual tangent. I know a lot about those. I'm off on those regularly. Some of you guys that come every week are like, we know, we know. Off she goes. As so much as the wife who adopts a sane, practical program, making a better use of it. And that's the thing, is if I want somebody to change, or I want somebody in my life to do something different, the best thing that I could ever do is demonstrate that change. You know, especially if they're not interested, you know, especially if I think they need to change on something they don't think. That's what Two Wives is all about. And Two Wives is all about me demonstrating the power of God, higher power, creator, spirit of the universe, the power of these 12 steps. So it says there will be other profound changes in the household. Liquor incapacitated father for so many years that mother became the head of the house. She met those responsibilities gallantly, so with bravery and courage and showing up, doing her best. By force of circumstances, she was often obliged to treat father as a sick or wayward child. Even when he wanted to assert himself, he could not. For his drinking placed him constantly in the wrong. Mother made all the plans and gave all the directions. When sober, father usually obeyed. Thus, mother, through no fault of her own, became accustomed to wearing the family trousers. Now, what I want to say about this is we might read this and we might be a little like, ugh, I'm not super comfy with those gender roles, or I'm not super comfy with that, you know, that sort of thing. And I just want to take a minute and let's take the gender out of it. And let's just look at our experience. My experience as the fall down, drunk, crackhead, pissing my pants behind a dumpster sort of person is that I was not the one that was like holding it together. You know what I'm saying? I couldn't hold me together. You know what I mean? Nothing was being held together. And so, and we can look at our experience. Was our experience in our family units, we were frequently in the wrong. And we're frequently being told, you know, here's what you got to do. Frequently, you know what I mean? Making mistakes, being the mess up. And the people in our lives either had to cut us out of their lives, or they tried to manage our lives, or tried to manage the family that I was a part of. Do you know what I'm saying? So if we take gender out of it, is this not my experience? And then it talks about wearing the family trousers. We might be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. But what I want to say is, the book isn't actually making a judgment. The book isn't saying that's right or that's wrong. At least how I read it. The book for me is just saying, hey, this is a thing that happens, and let's keep reading and see if this has been our experience once we sober up and have the spiritual awakening. It says, Father, or just us, coming suddenly to life again. And what I want to say about suddenly is, again, I want to emphasize, it does not take long to get well. It does not take long to have a spiritual awakening. It does not take long to come to life, right? Often begins to assert himself. This means trouble, unless the family watches for these tendencies in each other and comes to a friendly agreement about them. So what is the book saying? I might read it and it's like, hey, you give him back the pants. No, that's not what it's actually. It's kind of like, as an alcoholic, I was frequently missing my pants, so I could not wear the family trousers. You know what I'm saying? So what it's saying is, hey, somebody who has spent so much of this journey together, trying to manage and keep the family together, is going to have a hard time when the other person is like, hey, I have opinions and ideas, and I have the agency and the autonomy to make decisions. That's difficult. And for those who are Al-Anon members or qualify as Al-Anon, you guys might be aware of this experience. It's often a very difficult time after the alcoholic gets sober, because the alcoholic gets sober and it's like, but that hole in the depth of my soul is still there. I finally got what I wanted, and trying to navigate, like, now I was doing everything my way and now I got to compromise, you know, it can be really challenging. And so what is the book saying? The book is encouraging communication, watching, taking our own inventory, not, hey, you give me the pants. No, watching for my own desire for control or my own selfishness or me trying to force and have my way, and come to a friendly agreement about them, friendly communication, which is actually like, what a revolutionary idea. You know what I mean? Or at least it was for somebody like me when I was in relationships, like talking wild, coming to agreements, crazy, And so it goes on to say, drinking isolates most homes from the outside world. Father, in this case, the alcoholic, the addict, whatever brings you to this study, may have laid aside for years all normal activities, clubs, civic duties, sports. When he renews interest in such things, a feeling of jealousy may arise. The family may feel they hold a mortgage on dad so big that no equity should be left for outsiders. That feeling like, man, you don't know what I've gone through with this family member. Man, this person's attention, this person needs to be spending their time and effort and energy trying to make things right at home. This person can't enjoy civic activities and sports and clubs. What about me, right? And it says, instead of developing new channels of activity for themselves, mother and children demand that he stay home and make up the deficiency. And here's that God-centered approach, because that's what we're after, right? I need to spend time with my family. I need that. I mean, that is part of me making right the harms that I caused. I'll tell you what I was like. I'm somebody that would go missing. I would go missing regularly. And is it not important that I, of course I had to make that direct amends to my mother, but is it also not important that I show up to her and spend time with her and also let her know where I'm going at time? You know what I mean? I'm traveling for a month, so she knows. I told her ahead of time rather than before when I'm like, I'm gone. I didn't know where I was going either. Those were not planned vacations. I was on Blackout Airlines is what I was on. Anyone ever fly Blackout Airlines? It is a rough landing. I didn't put my tray table up. You know what I mean? Oh, it's rough. Well, listen, I lost my baggage and my pants. I didn't mean to carry the pants thing. Like, there's something about, like, I'm like, don't keep talking about that. But there's something about my brain. It's like, it's going to keep talking about that. I'm sorry. So that I've got to show up to my family. So it says at the beginning, the couple ought to frankly face the fact that each will have to yield here and there. We're coming to that friendly agreement. We're discussing it. We're working together to find a common solution. You know what I'm saying? Both will have to yield. It is not, hey, I am now sober, I got to do what I want. And it's not also, I am now sober, I can only do what they want. We need to work together. Communication, wild. And it says, and if the family is going to play an effective part in the new life. And I love that idea of being effective. When we talk about working with others, we don't talk about fixing them, saving them, managing their lives. What we talk about is being helpful. And like, that's what I'm there to do, is to be helpful. I was just speaking with somebody not long ago about this. That idea, it's at the end of Bill's story where it says, each day, my friend's simple talk in my kitchen multiplies itself. Right? And I always like to look, is my sobriety multiplying? Are the actions that I'm taking effective? Not to beat myself up if hey, it's not, no, but just to see what can I do to be more helpful, to be more effective. And that idea of new life. I say this a lot. These 12 steps are a way of life. This is not a set it and forget it program. This is how I live my life. So this way of life, and this is how I show up to family and to all areas, even the airport. This is how we show up, this way of life. So Father will necessarily, so this is a need, I will have to necessarily spend much time with other alcoholics. And what we're talking about there is working with others, carrying this message. I will have to spend time working with others. and this is an interesting line, but this activity should be balanced. So I'm going to go off on a spiritual tangent, but nothing will help me get right back on track as you guys work in a solid program. That's what'll help me. Now, I hear there are a lot of times in the rooms I would hear the word balance, and I'll be honest with you guys, I would bristle with antagonism. And that's not that harsh. I would get a little and some transparency. I might be a little like not open to the word balance because there's absolutely no balance in my life. I have physical vertigo, and clearly I've got some spiritual vertigo going on too. Nothing in my life is balanced. But here's the thing, I don't love the word balance. But if you do, I want you to know you're right, I'm wrong. Like really, that's the takeaway. Just write it in your book. Paige is wrong. It's fine. You know what I love is you'll do that, you'll forget, and then like a couple years later, you'll be like, why does it say Paige is wrong? What? You know, like who's Paige? Like I just love that. But you're right, I'm wrong. But and keep in mind that idea of finding balance. Sometimes we hear, I gotta find balance, I gotta find balance. I'll just throw it out there. Anyone ever find it? Anyone know anyone that ever found it? I feel like it's the lost city of Atlantis a little, you know, balance. Never matter, where'd you go, you know? But another thing too is if I am new, and actually, no, not if I am new, if I am not recovered, what I mean by that is if I have not had a spiritual experience as the result of these 12 steps, I don't need to find balance. Again, the context of the family afterward is the family dynamics after the spiritual awakening. It's kind of like, hey, if I was given a terminal diagnosis and if I have this illness, I have been given a terminal diagnosis with slim chance of recovery. You know what I mean? For us to get well, there's some actions we got to take. Now is not the time to be like, I know I've got inventory to write, but I really want to take up windsurfing. You know what I mean? And if I write my inventory, I make my amends, I go work with others, I keep this way of life rocking and rolling, you can do all the windsurfing you want. And the fact that windsurfing is the one that always comes to mind, despite living in Alberta. Do you know what I mean? We don't have windsurfing here. So clearly I have no balance. I don't know how to hobby, you know, but if I have not recovered, what I need to do is I need to seek the solution with everything that is in me. I don't need balance. I need to get well, and then it'll happen. But here's why. And so this is the only place in the book that uses the word balance. And here's why I don't like the word balance. Because I imagine being a server at a restaurant. And all these areas of my life are like those trays with all the plates, all the things that I got to do. And I'm trying to balance them. Well, look at this metaphor. Who's at the center? It's me. Uh-oh, I should not be at the center of my life. There is no worse place for me to be than at the center of my own life. You know who needs to be at the center? God. So instead of balance, I talk about God-centeredness. And am I God-centered? I hope so. Am I balanced? Absolutely not. Spiritual vertigo. And vertigo. Whee! Alrighty. So that's that tangent. So it says new acquaintances who know nothing of alcoholism might be made, and thoughtful consideration given to their needs. And I love, there's that idea of like, man, if I struggle with social anxiety, one of the most incredible, powerful things to do that has almost completely cured any social anxiety I have is to show up and be of service. That's what we were seeing and working with others. We got to see that, and we're picking that up here. Thoughtful consideration given to their need. The problems of community might engage attention. Though family has no religious connection, they may wish to make contact or take membership in a religious body. Alcoholics who have derided religious people. Now, that means to like express ridicule or contempt or mock, which I love because it's not saying, hey, some people, if you might be open to religion, you should go. It's like, no, if you were the most close to it, you should go, which is like, oh, you know us. Oh, because you are, you know, like, yeah. And it says might be helped by such contexts. Being possessed, which is to say like had, you know, experience, a spiritual experience, the alcoholic will find he has much in common with these people, though he may differ with them on many matters. Now, where would this, I always want to put some of these things in context. Where would this suggestion come from? Well, if I was an alcoholic living in 1939, living maybe in 1940, and I was given only a copy of this book, there's no AA, there's no CA, there's no DAA, there's no OA. There's 2 or 3 AA meetings. 2 of them are in Ohio, and I'm not near Ohio. I will be though. Sorry, that was just me being like, oh, I'm gonna be going to Ohio in a bit. Sorry, focus. But like, I only have a copy of this book, and what I would have to do is follow these directions and recover and go and help others. But here's my experience. It is really helpful as I go along the spiritual path, along the spiritual journey, to have people that are shoulder to shoulder. Of course, my sponsees and the people I work with, we're all shoulder to shoulder. But what I mean is people who are as far along the path as I have been. It's also helpful to have people in my life who are a little further along the path, who have a bit more experience that I can lean on. And of course, people that are new that I can help and teach and support. And if I only had a copy of this book, I'm going to be the furthest on the path in my community. So to find those connections with people who could help me grow in 1939, in 1940, church makes the most sense. And I will say, I absolutely love the suggestion of like, you really don't want to, and you struggled with judgment. Oh, go have a new experience. I love that. Like, and listen, I've had to do those things, and I've had a great time. So, and this is important. If he does not argue about religion, let's start there. Let's not argue. He will make new friends, and it is sure to find new avenues of usefulness and pleasure. He and his family can be a bright spot in such congregation. He may bring new hope and new courage to many a priest, minister, or rabbi who gives his all to minister to our troubled world. We intend the foregoing as a helpful suggestion only. So it's a, hey, you don't have to, it's a suggestion, and it's like, you really no pressure. So far as we are concerned, there is nothing obligatory about it. Obligatory would be obligation, which is to say you have to. You really don't. That's what it's saying. So, so far as we are concerned, there's nothing obligatory about it. As non-denominational people, we cannot make up others' minds for them. Each individual should consult his own conscience. And I love that conscience, with knowing, Yeah. So we have been speaking to you of serious, sometimes tragic things. We've been dealing with alcohol in its worst aspect, but we aren't a glum lot. If newcomers could see no joy or fun in our existence, they wouldn't want it. We absolutely insist on enjoying life. And one of the things I love it goes back to page 18 when it talks about my deportment shouts at the new prospect that I am a person with a real answer. You know what I mean? Like, my responsibility to those that are new is, of course, to be properly armed with facts about myself, but to work these 12 steps is such a way of life that, man, that there's joy and levity, and you can't deny that there's a change that has happened. Like, that's my responsibility to the newcomer. That makes me useful to the newcomer. I'm sure we've all been in a meeting where, when somebody's like miserable and it's like, oh, I want to have a cigarette next to you because you're going to go up like kindling. You know what I mean? Like, oh, somebody be careful if he goes out for a smoke. Or like there's times I've been with people that are saying the right things technically, but they're saying it in an angry, argumentative way. And I think God uses all messengers. But here's what I've found. Man, the people that are full of joy, and the spirituality, it radiates off of them. Their cup overflows, and you're like, man, I want some of that. That's what I feel like my responsibility is. Now, it's not, I want to be very clear, it's not, I'm miserable and I hate myself, so I'm going to pretend I'm okay, just so people think no. It's being honest, and I'm joking about authenticity and transparency when I turn my screen upside down. I'm like, oh, But to be honest and to work this stuff, and man, I tell you, my experience is the change came over me. It happened to me. I didn't do it. So we absolutely insist on enjoying life. So what I will say, if you want to attend church, that is a helpful suggestion. Nothing obligatory. You know what's obligatory as heck? Enjoying life. That's obligatory. You have to. Although we shouldn't say it like that, because I mean, if you tell me you have to, I'm like, don't tell me what to do. I'm gonna do the opposite. I'm gonna be miserable. But we insist. Enjoy, enjoy. And it says we try not to indulge in cynicism over the state of the nation, nor do we carry the world's troubles on our shoulders. We can't solve and fix every problem, but we do get to be a bright spot in the darkness. And actually, I'm just going to share this with you guys. Because there are times when there is pain and suffering just in the world at large. You know, when there's war or a natural disaster or just poverty or just overwhelmed by the magnitude of alcoholism and addiction, or overwhelmed by the magnitude of pain and suffering within our family, our community. You know what I mean? And what I can do is I can show up as best as I can to help. But when I'm feeling that overwhelmed, this is something that I do. So feel free to take it or leave it. But what I found helpful is a meditative practice known as Tonglen. And in it is a little bit counterintuitive. And what in this practice, again, this is just something that I've done, I found helpful, not in the book, feel free to ignore me. But what I found helpful is it's you imagine their pain and their suffering as this dark black smoke. That's one way if you're a visual person. And as you breathe in the darkness, and you breathe in their pain, and you breathe in their suffering. And if you've ever done some meditation, you know that there is a pause between your in-breath and your out-breath. There's a pause at the out-breath too, but we're focusing on the in-breath. And what I love to imagine is the God within my heart. The presence of God within me is transforming that darkness into that light. And as I exhale, I breathe that love, that peace, that happiness, that comfort. And you can imagine it as like a glittery white light or a golden light or white smoke or whatever visual works for you. I breathe in their pain and I breathe out love. And that can be really helpful when there's nothing else that I can do. And of course, prayer and of course, all those other things. But that was just a technique that I found really helpful and just felt like I should share. So nothing obligatory about that either, but we do insist on enjoying life. Rock and roll. All right. And it says, when we see a man that is sinking into the mire that is alcoholism. And I love imagining that quicksand, that mire just drowning. It says, we give him first aid. And that first aid is often that detox process, like maybe they need to get connected with detox or, that sort of thing. And place what we have at his disposal. What do I have at disposal for both of us? What I have is a spiritual awakening that happened as the result of these 12 steps. I have an experiential knowing of what it is like to have this illness, lack of control, lack of choice. I have an experiential knowing of what it is like to have a spiritual awakening, and I've experience with the simple kit of spiritual tools, and I just lay it at their feet. If they want to pick it up, amazing. And if not, I can't make them anyways. Listen, I've done some work at Al-Anon. I've tried. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I qualify, And it says, for his sake, we do recount and almost relive the horrors of our past. But those who have tried to shoulder the entire burden and trouble of others find we're soon overcome among them. See, my job is carry the message. You know that saying, carry the message, not the mess? Heck, I won't even carry the mess. I'll try to scoop up the little drunk and drag them through this thing, little scoops. And listen, I can't do squats anymore. So I really can't lift them, My lower body ain't what it used to be, and the upper body's not great either, so I can't do that. And if I try, and here's my experience, I find sponsorship. I find working with others to be the most incredible. It's amazing how uplifting it is. But that wasn't always my experience. When I would sit down with a sponsee and they would be like, hey, let me vent to you about my problems. And I would be held hostage, like, oh no, like that did not help. I know it didn't help because they'd continue to vent about the exact same problems next time. You know what I'm saying? And I tried to fix them. I tried to change them. I tried to save them. And that was me trying to shoulder the whole burden of their existence. And it didn't work. See, I can't keep myself sober. How could I keep anyone else sober? What I'm there to do is take their hand and put it in God's hands. That's what I'm there to do. Simply lay down a simple kit of spiritual tools. And man, when I do that, it is effective, not just in people getting well, but it's effective in me not wanting to pull out my hair. It works. So, uh, so it says, we think cheerfulness and laughter make for usefulness. Again, often, and see if you can remember what your first 12-step meeting was like. Yeah, I have a feeling you might remember one thing that was said, but you probably don't remember too much. But you probably, if I were to take a guess, you probably remember the atmosphere and the feeling. And maybe you saw people that were laughing at themselves. Or maybe you just saw people that were happy. You know what I mean? Cheerfulness and laughter make for usefulness. And I'm here to be useful. Useful to who? God and the people about me. So, and it says, outsiders are sometimes shocked when we burst into merriment over a seemingly tragical experience out of the past. Yes, it is. Actually, I'll tell the story real quick. It was a couple of years ago. I went to visit some family members, and they had, their neighbor was having a barbecue. Now, my family members, not alcoholic, not familiar with AA, not familiar with 12-step. The neighbors, absolutely normal people, do not suffer from this illness. And I'm a bit of a weirdo. So I was like, hey, let's play Gratitude Alphabet. So if you've not heard of that, great road trip game is where you start with each letter and say something you're grateful for. So I would say A, and I'd say something I'm grateful for A, and the next person would get B, and go on and so forth. And I want you to know, I play it competitively, but I play it to win. I mean, it's not competitive, it's not winning, but I play to win. I'm gonna get gratitude. And we were playing Gratitude Alphabet. It goes around, and I get the letter J. And so my gratitude, now keep in mind, I'm competitive. So I'm giving a good gratitude, and I'm feeling good about myself. So I go letter J, and I say joy. I am grateful because for the last few years in my life, I've been able to experience real joy. And some of you guys are like, oh, that's lovely. That horrifies normal people. Do you know what they caught? They caught what? For the last few years? What? They were mortified at that. I think I'm coming up with a delightful gratitude. They're wanting to have an intervention. I'm like, no, I'm good. Joy now. You know what I mean? So and we're the people. I have a dear friend. She's one of my spiritual pillars, and she was having a baby shower, and it was a beautiful summer day, a barbecue, and it's a bunch of 12-step folk hanging around at a baby shower. And we're all talking about interlock devices, which is, if you get a DUI, you get this thing on your car where you got to blow into it so you can drive. We're all joking about that. Non-alcoholics and non-addicts do not chit-chat about that at a baby shower. Just, but for us, we're like, oh, delightful. Anywho, I don't drive. I've never had one. But I've ridden a lot of cars where we're driving and they got like one sec page. You know what I mean? It's part of the deal. So it says, but why shouldn't we laugh? And here's what is able us to laugh, to have joy, to have merriment, to weird out not the newcomers, the normal folk who do not suffer from what we suffer from. We have recovered. We have recovered. There it is, recovered. Not solved, not cured, but solved. You know what I'm saying? I have recovered. I'm not there anymore. There is a solution, and I've been given the power to help others. Man, how is there not anything to laugh about? I'm not there anymore. And deeper than that, that stuff is what I get to use to help others. Man, this is Last night I was speaking. Last night was supposed to be my quiet day, because it's been chaotic and hectic. I was going to take a day of quiet. So, you know what I do? I do 2 lead shares. Why am I like this? And one of them, it was a meeting that has a Titanic boat theme. So I did a whole big book bounce around on boats, but I forgot to tell my albatross metaphor. And so I'll share it with you guys now because I was like, man, it's such a good metaphor, the albatross. And an albatross is a seafaring bird. It is a bird that can be at sea for a ridiculous amount of time. They can go out to sea for days and weeks and I think even months. And so when you're traveling by boat, an albatross is an important bird. And there's a thing that in those who were like traveling the seas, if you were to ever kill an albatross, that would be a sense of tremendous shame, and you would have to wear this albatross around your neck as punishment. And what I've come to find out is the albatross hanging around my neck, the pain and the suffering and the guilt and the shame gets transformed into the albatross that is flying in the sky that points to safe passage to new land. You know what I'm saying? So the painful past becomes my principal asset. And albatrosses live for a long time, but my brain's like, tell them all of the bird facts you have. And I'm like, nope, 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 dial that in. They don't need to know. Focus. Got a lot of that in my little noodle. Anywho, so that's my albatross tangent, but that's why we're able to laugh. And it says everybody knows that those in bad health and those who seldom play do not laugh much. So let each family play together or separately, as much as their circumstances warrant. We are sure God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. And often we hear that, happy, joyous, and free. But what's God's will for somebody like me? Happy, joyous, and free. But I've got to get, frank, open, and honest. I've got to, I got to do all this work to get to happy, joyous, and free. There's actions I got to take to get there. And it says we cannot subscribe to the belief that this life is a veil of tears. The troubles of the world, it's painful and it's nothing but sadness, though it was just that for many of us. But it is clear we made our own misery. Oh no, it wasn't clear when I got here. It took some inventory for me to get to I made my own misery. God didn't do it. God didn't do it. And it says, avoid then the deliberate manufacture of misery. I make these little sticker designs and silly, some of you guys have seen the little designs I make. I have this one in my brain, I haven't made it yet, where it's like deliberate misery manufacturing, the misery manufacturing company, that's me. I might not do that, but I'm just letting you know the thoughts. And it's because that's what it was. I don't know about you. I can take a beautiful, it's Monday, so I'll use a beautiful Monday afternoon. 1st of July, the weather's wonderful, and I will think my way into suicidal ideation. Do you know what I mean? I will manufacture my own misery. And not only that, I'll step on the toes of my fellows, and then I'll be very upset at their retaliation, right? So it says, avoid then the deliberate manufacture of misery. But if trouble comes, I want to point something out. This is the direction on how we do it. It says cheerfully, cheerfully. Capitalize it as an opportunity to demonstrate his omnipotence. And so what I'm here is to be a spiritual demonstration. It's not an intellectual, but an omnipotence is that all powerful. So don't create your own troubles. Believe me, life will happen. I don't need to find my own. But when trouble comes, use it as an opportunity to demonstrate God's power flowing in my life. That's what it's saying. And now we transition. It's a little bit of a, now this is where it's we're into the outside help, but hopefully depending on how we're doing for time, we'll get into the chocolate and candy. And my hope is to get to the coffee and cigarettes portion, but we'll see how we go. So it says now about health. Badly burned by alcohol does not recover overnight, nor do twisted thinking and depression vanish in a twinkling. We are convinced that a spiritual mode of living, what that means is These 12 steps as a way of life, that's what we're talking about, is a most powerful health restorative. So these 12 steps as a way of life, we regain health in a very powerful way. And it says, we who have recovered, there's that word again, recovered from serious drinkings are miracles of mental health. Like really, we are miracles, you know? And in Forward to the Second Edition, it talks about wholesale miracles. Like here, we got to come to 12 step and we get miracles, Costco sized miracles, you know? That's what we are, miracles by the, you know, by the truckload, you know? But we have seen remarkable transformations in our bodies. Hardly one of our crowd now shows any mark of dissipation. Now, dissipation, it often means overindulgence or self-indulgence or that like withering away. But in my 1930s dictionary, which is not the official one, there isn't an official one. It's not the one that most people use. I have a dictionary from the 1930s because I'm fun at parties. So I looked up that word in the 1930s, and it talked about dissipation being that in excessive indulgence in drink. So any mark of our excessive indulgence in drink. So just thought that would be a fun little, because nothing says joy of living rather than I looked up a word in the dictionary. Whee! You can have more fun than that, but that brings me joy. Anywho, all right. And it says, but this does not mean that we disregard human health measures. God has abundantly supplied this world with fine doctors, psychologists, and practitioners of various kinds. Do not hesitate to take your health problems to such persons. So if we need outside help, there is absolutely no shame in that. No shame in that. And I really want to emphasize, if you need outside help, that does not mean you're a bad 12-step member. That does not mean that you're doing it wrong. Sometimes the brain chemistry just is off, and that's okay. You know what I'm saying? That's okay. And it says most of them give freely of themselves, that their fellows may enjoy sound minds and bodies. Try to remember that though God has wrought miracles among us, and that's what God does, miracles among us, we should never belittle a good doctor or psychiatrist. And I always point out, it says I shouldn't belittle a good one. It doesn't say I can't belittle a bad one. I'm being pedantic. And this was, I think last cycle, I was like making a joke about like Dr. Phil, and people were like, we love Dr. Phil. Don't joke about the little Dr. Phil. I won't. I would never joke about such things. But shenanigans. Their services are often indispensable in treating a newcomer and following his case afterwards. So one of the many doctors who had the opportunity of reading this book in manuscript form told us the use of sweets was often helpful, which is like immediately my brain's like, oh, I gotta have candy. You know, like, oh, this is the candy portion. Listen, sometimes I'm aware 2 wives might be a hard sell. I mean, hopefully for those of you guys who've come and listened to me go on about 2 wives, you had a beautiful new experience. Family Afterward, not a hard sell. It's like, yeah, candy. And it says the use of sweets was often helpful, which, and then this next part is a little rude because it says, of course, depending upon a doctor's advice. Oh, rude. He thought all alcoholics should constantly have chocolate available for its quick energy value at times of fatigue. He added that occasionally in the night, a vague craving arose, which would be satisfied by candy. Many of us have noticed a tendency to eat sweets and have found this practice beneficial. Now, I will say it is implicit that we're talking about early sobriety. And if we're an alcoholic, the body often has a bit of a shock because there's a lot of sugars in alcohol. And so your body's like, oh, and so it's kind of helped to manage some of that withdrawal and some of that process. Now that is implicit, but it's not explicit. So it doesn't say, 14 and a bit half years sober. It doesn't say, it says constantly, it says all, it's a hee hee. I'm not a big chocolate person. I just like to be like, ooh, All right. Now, a word about sex relations. Alcohol is so sexually stimulating to some men that they have overindulged. Now, I'm also what we're talking about here, and I'm gonna just be real frank, we're talking about impetus, we're talking impotence. Now I can't say the word. We're talking about, struggling with having sex after we get sober. But we're talking about it from the male point of view, but it's also important to say that this might not be a sole male issue, right? It's talking about that dysfunction in that specific area. But for many of us, when we've been drinking or using drugs, especially stimulants like cocaine or methamphetamine or ecstasy, we overindulged in sexual behavior. And then getting sober, there can be a bit of a wanting to withdraw, or maybe even feeling a bit of shame or confusion. You know what I mean? So I just want to emphasize that this is a common, that's why it's in the book. This is a common thing that happens. So it says, couples are occasionally dismayed to find that when drinking is stopped, the man tends to be impotent. I was able to say it that time, probably because I was looking at it. Although, if you want to misread it, if you're a gentleman here and you're like, the man does tend to be important, and you just need that little boost of self-esteem, you can take it. I am important. That's not what it says. But if you wanted to add an R, you go right ahead. Unless the reason is understood, there may be an emotional upset, because you could imagine you get sober now and you're not engaging in that form of intimacy. And do they not like me now that they're sober? Did they only like me because they were drinking? Do you know what I mean? And so that's why part of why this is here, that some of that disconnect is not actually about the other person, but sort of navigating some physiological differences, but even some emotional changes in sobriety. So, and it says, some of us have had this experience only to enjoy in a few months a finer intimacy than ever. There should be no hesitancy in consulting a doctor or a psychologist if the condition persists. We do not know of many cases where this difficulty lasted long. And now we're going into rebuilding the relationship with the children. So it says, the alcoholic may find it hard to reestablish friendly relations with his children. Their young minds were impressionable while he was drinking. So we really hurt them as they were growing up. Without saying so, they may cordially hate him for what he's done to them and their mother. And it's not saying like, how dare they? It's saying like, of course, of course that would be hard. And the children are sometimes dominated by a pathetic hardness and cynicism. Now, that word pathetic, that stuck out to me because I'm like, oh, that's really harsh. These are some deeply traumatized children. So what I did was I looked it up in my 1930s dictionary because I'm fun at parties. And the word pathetic in my 1930s dictionary was affecting emotions or passions. So this emotional hardness and cynicism. And that makes a lot more sense to me. They cannot seem to forgive and forget. They may hang on for months, long after long after their mother has accepted dad's new way of living and thinking. Again, this is a way of life. This is not a set it and forget it program. So in time, they will see he is a new man, and in their own way, they will let him know it. So my job is to demonstrate, but also it says in their own way. So it is not the alcoholic, hey, I'm sober now. You need to get on board and forgive me. No. And what is it saying? In their own way. I gotta look and watch for that and meet them where they're at with compassion and understanding. And it says when this happens, they can be invited to join in morning meditation, which implies there is morning meditation. It's a thing that we do. That's a big part of this way of life. And they can take part in the daily discussions, that there are daily discussions within the family, that is also it's talked about throughout this whole, especially the later chapters, that the family has these daily discussions and connections, and they can take part and be a part of. Which again, if we got tripped up with the family trousers, we might think children should, the idea children should be seen and not heard. No, they can take part in. They can take part in. That's what this book is saying, that they're humans. And do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, like just my first reading, I might be like, hey, but if I just go a little slower and go with a little bit of ADHD that I may or may not have, we can see, I definitely do, we can see this like gentleness and kindness and not what we might see if we get stuck on trousers. So without rancor or bitterness. Now that rancor is that like deep spite, that anger. And it says from that point on, progress will be rapid, which makes sense because when that we're living this way of life, man, there's momentum. And some of you guys know I'm big on momentum. And it says marvelous results often follow such a reunion. So it says whether the family goes on a spiritual basis, is a basis of life, way of life or not, the alcoholic has to if he would recover. This is what I have to do to recover. These 12 steps is a way of life. That's what I have to do to get well. The others must be convinced of his new status beyond a shadow of a doubt. Seeing is believing to most families who have lived with a drinker. Now, what I want to point out is that is my responsibility. My responsibility is to demonstrate. Of course, it will take time, but it takes consistency in my actions. Oftentimes it's like, man, I'm 30 days sober, I'm 60 days sober. And for people like us, we're like, that is amazing. And that is miraculous. But it can take more than that to convince our family whose hearts we've broken again and again and again. So seeing is believing. I need to demonstrate. So we're going to read this story. And this story is Earl Treat. And his story is he sold himself short. Now, I might go a little bit over today. I always try to not go over, but we're going to read his story. And then we're going to read, we're going to pop over to page 264. So keep in mind the family afterward. It's the family members reading this, trying to figure out how we can navigate some of the difficulties and challenges. So it says, here's a case in point. One of our friends, it's Earl, is a heavy smoker and coffee drinker. So it's like, this is exciting. Coffee and cigarettes and chocolate. Whee! There is no doubt he overindulged. Seeing this and meaning to be helpful, his wife commenced to admonish him about it. That essentially means nag. Get on his case, nag him. He admitted he was overdoing these things, but he frankly said that he was not ready to stop. His wife is one of those persons who really feels that there is something rather sinful about these commodities. So she nagged. Her intolerance finally threw him into a fit of anger. He got drunk. Of course, our friend was wrong, dead wrong. He had to painfully admit that, own his mistakes, and mend his spiritual fences, make amends. Though he is now a most effective member of Alcoholics Anonymous, he still smokes and drinks coffee. But neither he nor anyone else stands in judgment. She sees that she was wrong to make a burning issue of such matters when his more serious ailments were being rapidly cured. So the lesson for the family is, hey, pick our battles. But we're going to see in just a moment what is the lesson for the alcoholic. So it says, it goes, I'm going to read this and then we'll pop over. So it says, we have 3 little mottos which are apropos. Here they are. First things first. Now, first things first, Rob will correct me if I'm wrong. It came from the Oxford group and it was God. Put God first. Live and let live. And that one of the things we often like let live, we see really easily, but it's also live. I get to live my life and enjoy my life, not just let them live their life. Goes on to say, easy does it. But do it. We got to do it. And that's for the family, And so let's pop over now. Where we're going to point to specifically is 264, but I think it might be fun to pop over to 263. Very bottom paragraph of 262, top of 263. I'm just going to cover this really, really quickly. It says that this is Earl Treat. He was involved in the Oxford group. He travels. He's from Chicago. He goes to Akron to meet with Dr. Bob. It says the day before I was due to go back to Chicago, it was Dr. Bob's afternoon off. He had me to the office, and we spent 3 or 4 hours. 3 or 4 hours, not days, not weeks, not months, not years, 3 or 4 hours, formally going through the 6-step program as it was at that time. And when I work with my sponsees and we do inventory, I sit with them and we write inventory together. I do have the luxury of the ability to do that and the time to do that, but I do that because it's effective. But I also noticed that's what Dr. Bob did. He's taking them through the 4 through 9 process and it's over together. They're doing it together. He's not like, go write it, going through the 6-step program as it was at that time. Now, this is a joke, and I really don't have time to make this joke, but I'm going to make this joke anyways. Here's the thing. Imagine, now this, he had already gone to some Oxford group meetings, so this is not true. But I love this. I love to put it in my mind. The idea of like, okay, he hears that in Akron there's a solution for alcoholism, and let's say he knows nothing about it. The book hasn't been written yet. So he goes to Akron, Ohio. He's like, you got to find Dr. Bob Smith. He'll be at the Akron City Hospital. So he goes to the Akron City Hospital, and he looks on the directory, and it says Dr. Bob Smith. Now, if you don't know what type of doctor Dr. Bob was, you're about to learn. Dr. Bob Smith, colorectal surgeon, proctologist. Dr. Bob was a butt doctor. And so he, in that moment, would have thought the solution for his alcoholism was invasive anal surgery. And he went in anyways. You know what I'm saying? That 4-step, that's not so intimidating now. You know what I mean? We can make that amends. Heck, this is way better, you know? And so it goes on to describe the 6 steps. It says, step 1 is complete deflation. That would be of the ego. Dependence and guidance from a higher power sounds like step 2 and step 3. Moral inventory sounds like our 4th step. Confession sounds like a 5th step. Restitution, that is amends, continued work with others. Now, what I will point out, to be very technically accurate, the 6 steps didn't quite exist as it was. Is that literally what you just put in? It should be noted that they didn't really exist. Yeah, they didn't. Yeah, literally what Rob did, but at the same time, that's wild. Sorry, when we're on like that. I'm like, we're on. So the 6 steps didn't actually exist as like these are the course of action. They didn't call them steps. It didn't exist like that. It was an oversimplification, and it was written kind of after in this as the big book was written. And so if people talk about the original 6 steps, we don't need to be like, you're wrong, but just know that it wasn't as easily, the history is a little bit more vague. It wasn't outlined in that way. Anywho, let's just skip over to page 264. And we're going to go about halfway through the page. It's the second, the very bottom paragraph of page 264, very bottom paragraph. So it says, a few months after I made my original trip to Akron, I was feeling pretty cocky. And I didn't think my wife was treating me with proper respect now that I was an outstanding citizen. She's nagging me about my coffee and my cigarettes. Ugh. So I set out to get drunk deliberately just to teach her what she was missing. That'll show her. That'll teach her. A week later, I had to get an old friend from Akron to spend 2 days sobering me up. That was my lesson. So the lesson for the family is pick your battles, pick your battles. But the lesson for us is this, that one could not take the moral inventory and file it away, that the alcoholic has to continue to take inventory every day if he expects to get well and stay well. And so that is the lesson for us. This is a way of life, and I got to do it on a daily basis. So thank you for indulging me 3 minutes over. I'm going to stop the recording and we'll wrap it up with a prayer. Oh, hold on. Got to hit stop.